Elijah Moore was the town's most trusted pastor. Monique Dawson was the woman he tried to forget. But when broken promises and buried secrets collided, their hidden past exploded into a violent crime that shocked an entire community. What began as a secret affair ended in cold-blooded murder, because some betrayals don't stay silent forever. In the quiet town of Morrow Creek, nestled between rolling hills and endless fields, Pastor Elijah Moore was more than a preacher. He was the moral backbone of the entire community. Every Sunday, his deep voice echoed through the old brick church that sat proudly at the town's center, drawing in hundreds of worshipers from all walks of life. Dressed sharply in tailored suits and always wearing a kind smile, Elijah had the kind of presence that calmed anxieties and stirred hearts. To many, he wasn't just a man of God, he was the image of perfection, a spiritual father, a mentor, and a man deeply rooted in values. Born and raised in Morrow Creek, Elijah was a hometown hero. He had returned after completing seminary studies, determined to breathe life into the aging church where his own parents once worshipped. Within just a few years, the once struggling congregation had grown into one of the most respected in the region. His sermons were thoughtful, heartfelt, and filled with messages of hope, love, and redemption. It wasn't unusual for people to leave the service in tears, moved by his words. He lived in a modest but beautiful home with his wife Angela and their 2 children. His family was the picture of unity, always smiling together in Christmas cards, always present at church events, and always seated in the front pew every Sunday. If there were any cracks in the image of this family, no one in Morrow Creek ever saw them. Elijah's reputation went beyond the pulpit. He led charity drives, counseled troubled youth, and visited the sick. If someone needed help, Elijah was the first to show up at their door. Because of all this, no one ever questioned his integrity. He had built a reputation that seemed untouchable. People trusted him with their secrets, their sins, their most painful confessions. He listened without judgment, always offering a warm prayer or comforting verse. Even those who didn't believe in God often respected Elijah for the peace he brought to the community. To them, he was genuine, grounded, and unshakable. But under this carefully constructed image was a man carrying secrets too heavy to share. He had spent years creating a perfect public life, one that left no room for mistakes. The pressure to remain flawless, admired, and obedient to his role began to weigh on him. He had once made choices that contradicted everything he preached, choices he buried deep, far from the eyes of his congregation. He believed the past would never catch up with him, that if he just kept walking the path of righteousness, the shadows would stay behind him. But secrets don't die. They wait. No one in Morrow Creek could imagine that their beloved pastor had once crossed a line so severe it would one day cost him everything. His charm and wisdom hid a history he had hoped would stay buried forever. While he comforted the grieving and guided the lost, a storm was quietly approaching, and when it arrived, it would shatter the illusion he had spent a lifetime protecting. Monique Dawson had always lived just outside the spotlight. Born and raised in the neighboring city of Riverton, she was the kind of woman people remembered, tall, poised, with sharp eyes that saw through small talk. She worked as a social worker for several years, passionate about helping women escape difficult situations. But behind her strength and independence was a heart that longed for connection, for someone to truly see her. That's what made her fall for Elijah Moore. They met during a regional church conference when Elijah was still relatively new to ministry. He had been invited to speak, and Monique was in the audience. His words struck her deeply. She approached him afterward, and their conversation flowed easily, like they had known each other in another life. What started as a few messages and spiritual discussions quickly turned into weekly calls, then late-night texts. Eventually Elijah started visiting Riverton more often, officially for church outreach, but always finding time to see Monique. It didn't take long before the relationship became romantic. At first, Monique believed their love was pure. Elijah spoke of divine timing, of soulmates, and even hinted at leaving his marriage one day. He painted a picture of a future where they could be together openly, without shame or secrecy. Monique, though hesitant at first, believed him. She believed in love. And more than that, she believed in Elijah. The affair lasted over a year, hidden behind locked hotel doors and encrypted messages. Monique kept quiet, even from her closest friends. She thought it was only a matter of time before Elijah would follow through on his promises. But over time, those promises began to fade. Elijah grew distant, his visits became shorter, his messages more cautious. Eventually, the communication stopped altogether. One day, he simply disappeared from her life. No explanation, no goodbye. The heartbreak was unbearable. Monique had trusted him, built dreams around him. She had believed she was special, chosen. The silence he left behind felt like a cruel betrayal, and while she tried to move on, the emotional damage lingered. She quit her job, moved to a different state, and began therapy, but she never fully healed. Elijah's abandonment lived in her like a ghost, haunting every relationship and decision that followed. Years passed, but the pain didn't. She watched Elijah's career grow from afar. Social media posts, church newsletters, news clips showing him standing tall in the pulpit, preaching about truth and morality. Each image was like a slap in the face. He had moved on with his perfect life while she was left to rebuild her world from ashes. What Monique didn't know was that buried feelings have a way of resurfacing. Pain, when ignored, festers into something darker. And inside her, that darkness was growing. She never wanted revenge at first, but over time, something shifted. The more she saw of his success, the more she remembered the lies. She had given everything, and in return, he had left her broken. And then, one day, she decided she wouldn't be forgotten. It was a bright Sunday morning in Morrow Creek, the kind of day that felt almost too peaceful to foreshadow tragedy. The church bells rang as usual, echoing through the streets as families made their way to service. Children in polished shoes skipped ahead of their parents, and elderly couples walked hand in hand toward the sanctuary. Inside, everything was prepared. The choir rehearsed softly, the ushers organized the rows, and the scent of fresh flowers filled the air. But Pastor Elijah Moore never appeared. At first, people assumed he was running late. It was rare, but not impossible. A few minutes passed, then 10, then 20. Whispers began to spread across the congregation. His wife, Angela, appeared confused, but calm, standing at the front, scanning the crowd and checking her phone. Eventually, one of the church elders decided to check the pastor's office. What he found changed everything. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, Pastor Elijah Moore was slumped over his desk, blood staining his white shirt. The office was still, eerily undisturbed. His Bible lay open beside him, and a single photo, torn and faded, sat on the desk, as if placed there on purpose. The elder froze for a moment before rushing out screaming for help. Within minutes, sirens pierced the morning air. Churchgoers were ushered outside, some crying, others too stunned to speak. News spread fast. By afternoon, the church grounds were taped off and swarming with police officers, detectives and crime scene analysts. The town was in shock. A man who had officiated weddings, baptized newborns and comforted grieving families was now the center of a murder investigation. No one could understand how such a violent act could happen in a place of worship to someone so universally admired. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing was stolen. No struggle, no overturned furniture, not even a broken window. Whoever had done this knew exactly where Elijah would be and how to get to him without making a sound. It was clear to detectives from the start that this was personal. Too clean, too intentional. The only immediate clue was the old photograph. It showed a younger Elijah smiling with a woman whose identity no one recognized. The photo had been torn in half down the middle and then carefully placed on the desk, not dropped, not forgotten. It was a message. Forensic teams worked quickly, dusting for prints, reviewing church security footage, and collecting evidence. But answers didn't come easily. Elijah's phone was missing, and the church's security cameras had stopped recording the night before due to a power glitch. Something that had never happened before. It was as if someone knew exactly how to cover their tracks. As the investigation deepened, people began to ask uncomfortable questions. Was Elijah truly the man they thought he was? Could he have been hiding something so dangerous that it led to his death? Grief quickly gave way to curiosity, then suspicion, and as detectives traced the torn photograph, they began pulling at the first thread of a much larger and darker story. The torn photograph found on Pastor Elijah's desk was more than just a clue. It was a gateway to a part of his life that no one in Morrow Creek knew existed. Detectives scanned the image through facial recognition databases, and within days they identified the woman, Monique Dawson, a former social worker who had changed her legal name over a decade earlier. Her current residence was in a quiet suburban neighborhood 2 states away, where she lived under the name Simone Harris. She had no criminal record, but her past was marked with red flags. Frequent address changes, multiple therapy visits, and a sealed court document involving a restraining order from several years prior. Detectives flew out to question her, not yet knowing the depth of her connection to the murdered pastor. Monique, or Simone, as she was now known, was calm, composed, and polite during the interview, but there was a coldness in her eyes that made even seasoned investigators uneasy. She admitted to knowing Elijah a long time ago, but denied any recent contact. Yet something didn't add up. She asked too many questions about the case. Her tone was too controlled, as though she had rehearsed it. Digging deeper, investigators obtained a warrant to search her home. What they found behind locked drawers and encrypted files unraveled the perfect narrative Elijah had maintained for years. Dozens of unsent letters addressed to him, handwritten and dated over the span of several years, were discovered. The letters ranged in tone, some filled with longing, others with anger and bitterness. In one she wrote, "You promised me a life, and all I got was silence." Another letter was more ominous. "You may have moved on, but I never did, and I won't." But the most damning evidence came from financial records. Investigators traced a pattern of monthly payments made to Monique's bank account, amounts ranging from $1,000 to $2,500 deposited from an account belonging to a shell company registered under a false name. With forensic accounting, they proved that the source of the funds was Elijah himself. It wasn't charity, it was hush money. For nearly a decade he had been paying Monique in secret. Every month, without fail. The arrangement had likely started after their affair ended, when Elijah realized the threat she posed to his reputation and career. He kept her quiet, hidden, and out of town with money and silence. But something must have changed. The payments had stopped abruptly 3 months before his death. Monique's psychological profile revealed a history of emotional instability, deeply tied to feelings of abandonment and betrayal. Experts concluded that cutting off the payments may have triggered a mental break. For years, she had accepted the quiet shame of being hidden. But when Elijah stopped paying and moved on with his growing fame, Monique saw it as the final betrayal. Detectives now had motive, evidence, and emotional context. The pieces were falling into place. Pastor Elijah's carefully guarded secret had exploded into the open, and the woman he once discarded had finally returned. Not with a cry for closure, but with a plan. The courtroom was silent as Monique Dawson walked in, dressed in a plain beige suit, her hair tied back neatly. She looked composed, but her eyes told a different story, one of years spent carrying the weight of a promise that was never fulfilled. The trial of Pastor Elijah Moore's murder had gripped the entire region. Church members, journalists, former colleagues, and curious citizens packed the courtroom every day. What they heard inside those walls was far from the image they had believed for so long. Prosecutors laid out the evidence piece by piece. The financial records showed nearly a decade of secret payments from Elijah to Monique. The unsent letters, recovered from her home, revealed the emotional torment she had endured. Experts testified about her mental state, describing a complex mix of love, grief, and obsession that had boiled over into something dangerous. The torn photograph found at the crime scene became a powerful symbol of a relationship that began with passion and ended in resentment. It wasn't just a story of betrayal, it was a story of a woman who had been promised a life she never received, and a man who had tried to erase her as his success grew. Elijah had preached about truth and forgiveness while hiding the one thing that could destroy everything he built. When Monique took the stand, her voice was steady. She didn't deny the affair, nor the pain it had caused her. She spoke of how Elijah had vowed to leave his wife, how he had told her they would one day start a family, how she had believed every word, because he wore the cloak of a man of God. She explained how the relationship ended without warning, how the silence that followed felt like death itself. Then came the years of payments, a silent contract that said, "Stay hidden." But when those payments stopped, it was as if her existence no longer mattered. She had been erased. She told the court that she never meant for things to end the way they did, but she also couldn't pretend she hadn't thought about it. She said she wanted him to acknowledge what he had done, to face her just once more. But when he refused, when he cut off contact for good, she felt like the only way to be heard was to take something from him. And she did. The jury deliberated for less than a full day. The evidence was overwhelming. The motive was painfully clear. Monique Dawson was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom remained still as the sentence was read. No celebration, no outburst. Just a heavy silence, as if the truth had sucked the air out of the room. Back in Morrow Creek, the church never reopened. The stained glass windows were boarded up. The community was left with a scar that couldn't be hidden. The story of Pastor Elijah Moore wasn't just about a murder, it was about how one man's secret life led to his downfall, and how the lies we bury have the power to rise again no matter how deeply we hide them.